everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dissecting the Truth, Case Files Uncovered. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about the tragic story of Elizabeth Sullivan. Before we jump in, I just want to add a disclaimer that I mean no harm to anyone involved in the case. I am simply compiling all the information that I have found online and I'm putting it all into one video for information purposes. I hope you guys enjoyed the last video. If you haven't watched it yet, it's a two-parter of the Ted Bundy case. Make sure to give this video a like, comment and subscribe, and let me know down below what your thoughts are on this case. Without much to do, let's get on with the case. Today's stories begin with a 20-year-old girl called Elizabeth who was living in Virginia. Elizabeth was described as a very spontaneous person. She started her career as a dancer and then moved on to a musician, and she kept changing careers a lot throughout her life. She was living with a friend at the time when she met a Navy officer called Matthew Sullivan. Matthew was based at the naval base. The two hit it off straight away, and Elizabeth said that she and Matthew fell in love so quickly. Unfortunately, the happy couple was soon faced with a heartbreaking decision. Matthew was told that he was actually being deployed to San Diego. Elizabeth decided that even though the two had only been together for about 3 months, that she was certain that she wanted to move with Matthew. The two actually got married and they moved to San Diego. So when the two moved to San Diego, Elizabeth phoned her friend Calandra and told her that she was positive that she was pregnant. So the two have just got married and now they're expecting their first baby. When Elizabeth told Matthew that she was pregnant, he was so happy, and so the two kept the baby, and together they had a little baby girl. Unfortunately, the excitement didn't stay around for very long because Matthew was quickly told that he was being deployed overseas this time. The two are now adjusting to their new normal of Matthew coming and going, and Elizabeth starts her new life as a new mum and as well as a military wife. Soon after this, Elizabeth found out that she was pregnant again with another baby girl. Elizabeth is now raising 2 baby girls as well as being a military wife, and whilst her husband is deployed overseas. She's actually starting to feel quite isolated at this point. She hadn't made any friends because the moment she stepped foot in San Diego, she started raising her 2 daughters. And she had 2 kids under the age of 4. I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to add this in, but Elizabeth was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She also suffered with her mental health really badly, and Elizabeth would use prescribed and non-prescribed drugs to help cope with all of these emotions. She also used self-harm to cope with her thoughts and emotions as well. She soon decided that she did not want to feel like this forever, so she promised herself that she would go out and make some new friends. She put herself out there and soon she actually found a friend, and his name was Nathan. Now, Elizabeth lent a lot on Nathan, and they actually became best of friends really quickly. Elizabeth started to confide in Nathan. Nathan soon found out about all of Elizabeth's horrible thoughts and how she was truly feeling in the inside. Matthew, Elizabeth's husband, soon comes home to tell his wife that he's moving back home permanently. Now, this would be and should be such a happy time, but Elizabeth honestly was struggling with this. She went and told her best friend Nathan that the reason that she didn't want Matthew to come home was because she felt like he was disturbing their life. She'd just gotten the 2 girls into a good routine, and quite frankly, Elizabeth nor their 2 daughters actually knew Matthew at all. Their father had been deployed for pretty much their entire life. The eldest was 4, the littlest was 2. And so for the last 4 years, they've only really seen this man here and there. They don't really know who he is, and neither does Elizabeth. Even though these two are married, they actually don't know anything about each other. Either way, Elizabeth stayed positive and hoped that by Matthew moving home, their children would finally get to know their father. But that never happened. Matthew actually didn't have a license, and so this meant that Elizabeth was the sole provider in driving everyone around. She was constantly driving Matthew back and forth whenever he needed to go and do something. She was starting to get extremely annoyed at this. She started to realise that her marriage actually needed some help. So she spoke to Matthew and she asked Matthew if the two could work on their marriage, and Matthew simply turned around and said no. He was happy with where their marriage were at. He was happy with the way that their marriage was. They were acting like single people. They were even sleeping in different rooms, and they weren't very affectionate towards each other. But Matthew didn't care, and nor did he actually want to fix it. Instead, he informed Elizabeth that his parents and his sister were moving in that very week. Elizabeth actually had no say in this at all, and she was actually terribly upset. Her in-laws didn't like Elizabeth, and so she knew that with them moving in, it just would not go down well at all. And she was worried about her two children as well, being around their grandparents and their aunt. She knew that if she wanted to work on her marriage, it was not going to be possible with Matthew's parents and sister living in the same house. It was simply just not going to work. Elizabeth decided that she was going to stay at a friend's house that night. She needed time away from Matthew, and so she actually stayed at her best friend Nathan's house. Now, I just want to add here that the friendship between Nathan and Elizabeth was just that. It was nothing more, nothing less. They were simply just friends. She told Nathan that she wanted a divorce, and she had already spoken to a divorce attorney. She told Nathan that before the conversation with Matthew regarding the two working on their marriage, she'd already thought about divorcing him. So it was always in the back of her mind. But now that Matthew has expressed that he didn't want to work on their marriage, she knew for sure that she did not want to stay in this situation. The next morning, on October 12th, 2014, she went to her kids and soon-to-be ex-husband. Nathan was genuinely concerned about his friend due to the conversation that they had had the night before. So he decided that he was going to call Elizabeth to make sure that she was okay. Elizabeth did in fact answer the phone, but she was acting extremely strange. She was kind of like whispering, I guess, and she actually explained to Nathan that she wasn't able to talk and that she'd call him tomorrow. Before Nathan could say anything, she hung the phone up, and that was the last time that Nathan ever heard from Elizabeth again. Monday the 13th comes and goes, and Nathan never received that phone call from Elizabeth. Tuesday the 14th of October, Nathan has yet to hear from Elizabeth. So he decided that he was going to call Matthew, Elizabeth's husband. Now, Nathan and Matthew weren't close, but they also weren't complete strangers either. I would say that they were definitely accomplices. He told Matthew that he knew that Matthew's family was staying and that Elizabeth was struggling with it, and honestly just wanted to make sure that Elizabeth was okay because he hadn't heard from her in 2 days. Matthew told Nathan that Elizabeth wasn't here and that he also hadn't heard from her since yesterday. Matthew told Nathan that he thought that Elizabeth was somewhere cooling off. Elizabeth was known for doing this when she was angry, so Matthew didn't think much of it. She would sometimes sleep in the park and cool off, but she would always return home. After hanging up the phone, Nathan knew that something was really wrong. He knew that even though Elizabeth was mad, she would never leave her little girls. She loved those kids with everything that she had. He decided to call 911. He told them that he knows that he's only a friend, but he is extremely concerned. He asked for the police to look for her and just do a welfare check. And the police informed him that there isn't much that they can do because Elizabeth's an adult and she can come and go as she pleases. But the police did say that if she didn't return home in the next few days, to contact them again. Days go by and no one has heard from Elizabeth. Her friends and family back home were so concerned about her safety. Besides Matthew, he honestly could have cared less about where his wife was. So now it's been 3 days and still nothing from Elizabeth. So her friends and family decide to officially report her as a missing person. San Diego police go to the home and they search the property that Elizabeth was sharing with her husband. Now, Elizabeth and Matthew's home was actually based at Liberty Station, which is a military base in San Diego. The police searched the home and they found no foul play and they couldn't find anything. They did notice in the garage was Elizabeth's car and a large freezer. They looked in the freezer and found nothing suspicious. Keep that in mind. Please remember that, okay? They did take note that if Elizabeth was a runaway, it was strange that she didn't take a car. They noticed that Matthew and Elizabeth were sharing different rooms. They searched Elizabeth's room and they took note that it was a mess, but nothing strange. Matthew told police that a suitcase and Elizabeth's laptop were all missing, which is why he thought that she'd left on her own terms. He also told police that Elizabeth had transferred all the money from their joint account into a private account just for herself, and that she did this before she disappeared. Now, Elizabeth kept all her journals that she would write in, and Matthew handed these over to police. And I guess he hoped that it would lead to the finding of his wife. But again, he didn't really care. He never called 911 to report her missing, and his behaviour was just suspicious from the beginning. They left the Sullivan's home and went back to investigate about the so-called transactions. That's when the police discovered that there had been activity on her account days after she had gone missing. And because of this, everyone kind of relaxed, and now the idea of her running away was starting to become more of a possibility. Missing person posters was plastered all around the city of San Diego, and everyone was on the watch for Elizabeth. All the police wanted was to make sure that she was okay, and in fact, a lot of people wanted that. Even if she was a runaway, they just wanted to know that Elizabeth was okay and well and alive. 1 week into her disappearance, a police officer had claimed to have seen Elizabeth in a soccer field and that she did seem extremely disorientated. Another person had said that they'd seen her in the airport. Both of these were later discovered to be wrong. Matthew all of a sudden was showing interest in the disappearance of his wife. He started talking to the media and he had said that he honestly thought that Elizabeth was a runaway, but now he's not so sure. Elizabeth's dad had flown to San Diego to help find his daughter, and he pleaded with the public to help locate his little girl. By now, police were starting to investigate anyone who was close to Elizabeth. Of course, they interrogated Nathan, and because he was her best friend, he was asked to do a polygraph test and he denied it. Matthew was asked to do a polygraph test. He accepted and he passed. His house was searched again and police took things that had Elizabeth's DNA on it just in case they did need to identify a body. A month goes by and there are no more sightings of Elizabeth. She had literally vanished into thin air, and this is when police started to look more into her personal life. And they found a lot. They found that Elizabeth had BPD, which is borderline personality disorder. They also found out that Elizabeth was taking prescribed and non-prescribed drugs. Her friends did say that Elizabeth used these to self-medicate. I'm not sure what the prescribed or non-prescribed drugs were, but all I know is that she was using these to help medicate. They also found out that another form of self-medicating that Elizabeth did was the self-harm, like we had spoken about before. And they also found out that before she went missing, she was writing a novel. Now, the novel was something different. It wasn't just a regular novel. Elizabeth was writing a novel about a girl who fell in love with a man, and she referred him to her knight in shining armour. And together they raised a little girl. But then all of a sudden, the main character, as in the girl, ran away, leaving her husband and daughter behind. Everyone, including the police, started to believe that Elizabeth was trying to recreate her novel into reality. Now, everything was starting to unravel, and all of a sudden, all of Elizabeth's dark secrets were coming to light. Police discovered that she had downloaded Tinder, and her friends came to her defense and said that she used Tinder to help escape from her reality. Police, of course, had to investigate this, and when they did, they had discovered that Elizabeth had met up with someone. Now, police are starting to believe that the person that met up with Elizabeth has done something to her, and that she could actually be in serious trouble. 2 months of investigating, they found a man called Sullivan who had met Elizabeth on Tinder, and the two had actually started dating, so Elizabeth was having an affair with Stephen. In the beginning, Stephen was making the police's life a living hell. He was being extremely difficult to interrogate, and so the police couldn't get much out of him. So the police had to be a little bit smart with this. And a month before Elizabeth went missing, her little secret, her little affair, had actually come to light, and it had gotten a lot of unwanted attention. Elizabeth had said that Stephen was everything that Matthew wasn't, and she would actually spend a lot of her time at Stephen's house. Obviously, she couldn't do it at her house because her husband was there as well as her 2 children. Stephen actually shared this house with his roommate, and his roommate and Elizabeth got on really well, but Stephen's roommate's girlfriend did not get along with Elizabeth at all. She didn't like her, and we don't really know why, she just didn't like her. The girlfriend had made up all these assumptions about her before even getting to know Elizabeth. And one day, the girlfriend noticed that there was 2 car seats in the back of Elizabeth's car. The girlfriend instantly jumped to assumptions and assumed that Elizabeth had left her 2 children at home by themselves without even asking Elizabeth or asking anyone. She had called CPS on Elizabeth. Now, Elizabeth obviously ended up finding out about this because CPS came to her home and they had to investigate. CPS also told Elizabeth that they were going to have to contact Matthew and make sure that it all added up, because if it didn't, then they needed to investigate more. Elizabeth did explain to CPS that she was having an affair and that obviously her husband didn't know about it. So she decided that before CPS got to Matthew, she was going to tell him first. Matthew ended up finding out about this affair. So when Matthew got home that day, Elizabeth broke down and she told Matthew everything. Now, when the police found this out, they had actually spoken to Matthew and asked Matthew what he felt about it. Now, he said that he didn't care, but obviously the police knew that he would care. Nathan had actually told police that even though Matthew had told Elizabeth that he didn't care, that she actually cared quite a lot. And this is when she went on a massive spiral and she went down a really dark path of self-harming again. Now, Matthew told police that he didn't care, but police actually found out that he might have cared a little bit more than he was letting on. Police found out that Matthew's call history had showed that Matthew was literally harassing Stephen. He was telling Stephen that he was going to cut Elizabeth off completely and that Stephen needed to go and get an STD check. Stephen at this point was staying quiet until he publicly told the media via his attorney. After Elizabeth disappeared, he had received an email from a person called Badly Drawn Girl, claiming to be Elizabeth. Stephen was unsure about this, and so he asked the person who had received the email off of a question that only Elizabeth would know. The question was, what did Elizabeth give to him for his birthday? Now, the correct answer was a keychain, and the person who was a hold of this email replied back and said a keychain. Stephen at this point felt that Elizabeth was alive and that she was just on the run. Police had asked for the email, but Stephen had said that he had deleted the email, which is strange because if someone that you had a relationship with or didn't had gone missing and you received an email from them from someone claiming to be them, the first thing you would do is go to the police, because we need to remember this is 2014 and so technology was quite advanced at this time. Police had nothing to go off and soon the case went cold. As we know, Elizabeth's marriage was not good at all and they actually had a lot of issues. Police only caught on to this a few months later after she was reported missing. Police found out about a lot of things, including 3 911 calls. The first one was from Elizabeth, which was a few months before she disappeared. She called 911 and told them about her husband and how he had been physically abusive towards her. The second phone call was the day that she went missing, and this 911 call was from Matthew, who called 911 about something that you don't really call 911 for. He said that his wife Elizabeth was saying that she was going to take his 2 daughters away from him. He also said that Elizabeth was going to ruin his life and his reputation. He said that she used his credit cards to pay for a divorce attorney and that he felt that he was going to be served with divorce papers very soon. About an hour later, the second 911 call came in, and this time Matthew had said that Elizabeth had moved all the money from their joint account into a separate account just for her. But he hadn't actually seen his wife yet. The 911 operator told Matthew that there was nothing that emergency service can actually do about this, but to call back when she does get home and they can send someone out to try and help resolve the situation. Matthew never called back. It also came out publicly by Nathan that the night that Elizabeth called Nathan, that she'd actually told him she had a plan to leave. She had lawyered up and she told Nathan a dark and horrific secret. She told Nathan that Matthew was physically abusive towards her. She told Nathan that in this order she was going to get a restraining order against him and then divorce him and leave him. When this came out to the media, Matthew had deleted all photos of Elizabeth off his social media, blocked all of her family and friends, and cancelled her phone bill, which this confused me because if she was still alive, which everyone thought at this point that she was just a runaway, why would you cancel the only way of her communicating to anyone? It just doesn't make any sense. Less than 3 months after she disappeared, Matthew brings home a new girl, who he claimed was simply just to help look after the 2 kids. But that's what family is for. And considering that his mother, his father, and his sister were still living with him, it was quite strange that he needed any more help. Shortly after this, he did in fact change his relationship status on Facebook to in a relationship. Police were starting to get suspicious of Matthew, and so they wanted to look a little bit closer into his life, his movements, his actions. So the day that Nathan had reported Elizabeth missing, Matthew had gone down to the store and purchased a carpet cleaner. When asked, Matthew had said that he brought it because his parents were moving in and he wanted to clean the carpets before they came. 1 month later, after she was reported missing, Matthew went out and brought more carpet cleaner as well as industrial wrap. He again had a reason, and this time was because he was putting things into storage. We are now fast forwarding to 2016. At this time, Matthew had his third child with the girl that he was in a relationship with. He was still living in the same house that he shared with Elizabeth, his still missing wife. That same year, on October 4th, an off-duty marshal was walking along the San Diego shore when his dog started heading towards the rocks. The marshal went to see what his dog was looking at, and that's when he found the body of a deceased woman laying on the shore. The San Diego police were obviously notified, and they arrived not too long after this. All of Elizabeth's friends and family at this point, they had a horrible gut feeling that this was Elizabeth. The police used the DNA that they had collected from the years prior, and they had matched it up with the body, and the body was identified to be Elizabeth Sullivan. All of Elizabeth's friends and family, they had said that it was kind of like a weight lifted off of their shoulder. Of course, they didn't want to find out that their daughter and their friend was dead, but in a way it was weight lifted off their shoulder to finally have closure. 2 years after Elizabeth was reported missing, her case was finally reopened. And now the case of Elizabeth Sullivan was no longer a missing person case. It was in fact a murder case. The autopsy also showed that Elizabeth did have her prescribed drugs in her system at the time. They also saw multiple stab wounds to the body that were actually deep enough to touch her bones. The police and the public were so confused at this point to where Elizabeth had been for the last 2 years, because the state of her body suggested that she had only been killed 1 to 2 months prior, not 2 years. There was no way that if Elizabeth was truly killed the day that she went missing 2 years ago, and then dumped in the river, that her body would not be in this good of condition. This led everyone on a wild goose chase within their own minds, trying to figure out how this is even possible, because it isn't possible. The day that Elizabeth's body was found, Matthew was packing up their home, and 3 days later he had moved himself, his 3 kids, and his girlfriend to Maryland. Police decided that now that Matthew was out of the house, they were going to search the house again. They searched Elizabeth's bathroom first, and they covered the bathroom in luminol. And when they did this, the bathroom quite literally lit up the whole house. Now, luminol is a product that police use to try and find traces of blood. If you clean up blood and the police spray luminol on it, it will still show up the blood. So this bathroom was covered in it. Absolutely covered in it. The blood was not only just in the bathroom, but there was a trail of blood that led out the door, and all of a sudden it stopped, and it led to a massive puddle of blood. The puddle was so bad that the blood had actually leaked through the carpet and into the padding. They tested the blood, and it came back to be a positive match of Elizabeth's. The police took this to the DA, which is the district attorney, in hope that they could make an arrest, but unfortunately the district attorney said that it wasn't enough to charge Matthew, because Elizabeth did have a history of self-harm, so this could have just been a suicide attempt. The police were certain that Matthew killed his wife. A year went by, and they decided to search the house once again. And this is where they found the murder weapon. In the roof of the home that they had raised their 2 daughters in, there was a knife shoved into the installation, and it had blood on it. The blood was a perfect match with Elizabeth, but there was 2 different DNA samples on it. The first one being Elizabeth's, and the second one being Matthew's. Matthew's DNA was on this knife as well. After this, Matthew was finally arrested after 5 years of his now ex-wife being reported missing. A lot of people testified against Matthew and told the jury about the domestic violence and the abuse that Elizabeth had told them about. Calandra took to the stand and said that the night before Nathan had reported Elizabeth missing, that Elizabeth had called her and was saying how they had got into a massive fight, and then halfway through the phone call, the phone hung up. Prosecutors believed that Elizabeth was murdered after this. The question still stood: where was Elizabeth's body for the last 2 years after her body was found? Now, remember the thing that I said to remember. Prosecutors now believe that Matthew killed her and then hid her body in the attic. The police came through, they searched the home. They did not search the attic though. They found nothing. And then when the police left, Matthew had grabbed Elizabeth's body down from the attic and stored it for 2 years in the industrial freezer. The freezer that the police had originally searched, and there was nothing in there. Matthew was smart. He'd put her body in the attic. He knew that police were going to look into him first, but he wasn't smart enough. He then hid her body in the freezer for 2 years, and then he decided that he didn't want to live there anymore. He dumped her body in the river and then tried to move away. Experts say that there is a way to actually slow down the decomposition of a body, and that is by freezing it. The jury deliberated for only an hour, and the verdict was that the jury had found Matthew not guilty of first-degree murder, but guilty of second degree. He was sentenced to 16 to life in prison. I don't understand how he wasn't charged with first-degree murder, but I am glad that he was charged with something and he is in prison. That is the case of Elizabeth Sullivan. Let me know down below what your thoughts are. Like I said, this case is so strange because it's the first case that I've ever heard of that the killer had stored their victim's body in a freezer. It's definitely different, and unfortunately the result of it was that a beautiful young woman was taken in the hands of her husband. We still aren't sure exactly why or what the motive was, but we can assume that it was because he was angry. He didn't have control, he was losing it, and Elizabeth was going to leave him. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like I said, let me know down below, and I'll see you guys in next week's video, which is going to be the case of JonBenet Ramsey. This is our first unsolved case. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye guys.